Here at the IRS, we spend January, February, and March doing various NCAA bracket scenarios.
Hey everyone, Will O'Toole welcoming you to another edition of Park Ridge Sports History. This week, even though I've started off with a college basketball cartoon, I'm going to, and this is a shout out to Howard, who has just been my tremendous producer and mentor with this program. I'm going to do all things Hot Stove League, and I'm going to do a particular team, the 1969 San Diego Padres and the franchise, the San Diego Padres, as we welcome in not just spring training, but the baseball season after a long and, I got to be honest with you, a very wet winter. But I want to really spend some time talking, and I do love expansion teams. I love all things baseball history. And the reason why I'm doing the San Diego Padres is that it's a team whose nickname and the whole franchise really evokes the old Pacific Coast League teams of the turn of the century, 20th century. Basically, I'm thinking about 1940s and 1950s. We had great players who came out of the Pacific Coast League, including Ted Williams, a San Diego native, Joe DiMaggio, Tony Lazzari. So we had tremendous number of players who played in the Pacific Coast League. And this is a shout out because there was a minor league team called the San Diego Padres. So when they came aboard in 1969, and this is a tribute to baseball, that baseball does have, I think more than any other sport, a sense of tradition and just a sense of honoring things in the past. And by naming a new franchise, 1969, the San Diego Padres, it really is a celebration of the Pacific Coast League, its history, its fabulous players and managers and fans. And so I just want to really just key in on that 69 Padre team. Now, they didn't win much, 52 games, and they almost finished out by as many games as they won. They finished 41 games out to the Atlanta Braves, who were the winners of the National League West, the first time that the National and American League separated to two different divisions within the league. That's 1969, big significance. And the league expanded from 10, which had expanded from 8 in 1961 and 62. Now they moved to 12 in 69 with the emergence of the Royals, the Expos, the Padres, and of course, a team who is still celebrated to this day, even though they do not exist technically, the Seattle Pilots. Yes, people say, well, they're really the Milwaukee Brewers, but not really technically and legally. They're not really. The Pilots are a team and a franchise unto themselves and brought beautifully to life every year. If you read Ball 4, Jim Bouton's diary of his really 9 months spent with the Seattle Pilots before he was traded to the Houston Astros. Anyway, I do want to talk a little bit about the NCAA, but it's really a shout out to Howard and all you baseball fans who have been putting up with terrible weather here in the Northeast. You know, as I said, the rainy weather on the weekends, but now we're ever closer to having games being played on grass and dirt instead of turf, instead of wood paneling, and on ice. Nothing wrong with those three sports of football, basketball, and hockey, but there's something about baseball. It's poetic, really. And not too many, there's not too many poets, as a matter of fact, that are really, I don't know, writing great essays or unbelievable poems about hockey or basketball or football. But you do have Casey at the bat. You do have some marvelous poetry about baseball and how baseball is equated to just like the lush beauty of and rustic charm of the country. And I think it's baseball when it does finally opening day. That's even capitalized, opening day. It is a beginning, and it is an ending of winter and all things dark and dreary and being in your home. And now just like the flowers are blooming, baseball comes aboard, and now we spend more time outside as the days get longer, the days are warmer, and it just puts a real smile on your face, knowing that, hey, a couple of things are approaching: summer, the end of school, and baseball, baseball, baseball. You know, it is the one sport that's played every day. Even basketball and hockey, no matter how much, it's really an every other day affair. And for basketball fans, particularly of college, who love March Madness, even your teams that you follow in college, they play maybe once every 4 days. But baseball's played every day, and I think that's why it resonates with the American public. It's a day in, day out, day out. It is a grind. It is probably the most difficult sport to watch because it does demand a daily observance. But if you're a real baseball fan, it's one of those things that it's really a labor of love to be able to go into those box scores every day and find out how your favorite player did, how many home runs your team hit, did they win, and where are they in the standings? Are they a couple of games ahead, or do they need to do some work and get back into the race? So that being stated, I just want to say this. I am, of course, a Seton Hall fan. I love the Big East. I'm rooting actually for Rutgers to make a run, so anything can help Seton Hall. But I will tell you this. I am still confused. There are basketball ratings that still have to be explained to me. I know I'm not the brightest bulb. I know I'm not the sharpest tack. But sometimes these metrics that they use for basketball to determine or rate the teams, it just baffles me. Seton Hall has beaten St. John's twice, and yet St. John's with a record of 15-12 or 16-12. I know they had a big win Sunday against the Creighton Blue Jays. Nevertheless, they got beat twice by the Pirates. And yet Seton Hall, it's not like it's 39 and Seton Hall is 40. I mean, Seton Hall is way back at 56 in some rankings. Xavier, who they split with, is way ahead, and they're under 500. They're about 10, 12 spaces ahead. Providence, another team that they split with, both winning games at the opposing court. For whatever reason, Providence is way ahead of them. So Seton Hall has their work cut out. If they make it, great. I've had an unbelievable season. If Seton Hall doesn't make the tournament, I'm not going to moan and groan because there were lost opportunities for this team, which if you watch them, okay, they can be very frustrating to watch. I find them exciting, but then again, I am a fan of the team. I love how they play. They can't shoot the ball in the ocean, but man, they can play some lockdown defense, which kind of keeps them in games. I know all you big fanatics are going to say, man, they got blown out by a number of teams this year, including out of conference. Yet, if you do watch day in and day out, the games that they win, or they manage to just clamp down on the opposing team, and that gets them back in. When they rely too much on the threes, that's when we're in trouble. And I had been doing a stat with them, like they can't fall behind even at the outset. They got to be right there. Anyway, before I go off on a tangent, and again, here's another tangent. I was just out with one of my best buddies the other day. Went to see some high school basketball, and we were sitting enjoying a pizza. And this is what I was saying to him. I said, Johnny, this is what it's about. We started off talking about high school basketball, and it went to college basketball. It went to the pros, talking about the great Bird, Magic, and Jordan teams of the 80s and 90s. And you say to yourself, wait a minute, how did we get up here when we started talking about this and a basketball play that we saw in a high school game? And that's how I want it, and I don't really care. I mean, of all the three followers, I think you like the fact that I go off on tangents, but that's how sports are discussed. You go to any bar, if you have friends, you go after a game, as I've said this before a number of times. You have a couple of beers and a hamburger. You're talking about last night's game, and then it makes you remember players from 20, 30 years ago, and then all of a sudden, you're not even talking about last night's game. You're talking about the All-Star game from 1946. in the NBA. Well, that was the NBL then, but you know what I mean. So you go off on tangents, but that's the beauty of conversation. And of course, I guess I'm going to give an opinion here. I think that's what's being lost with all the texting that we do. And I'm just as guilty of it. You're sitting at the table and you're texting. When you're having conversations like this, and just like my hands, you're going off on all tangents. That's the beauty of being a huge sports fan. You never know where the conversation is going to lead you, what debate you're going to have, and the fun you can have doing it. And that's just my preference. So that's how I'm going to keep it. Anyway, we're going to talk about the San Diego Padres, who came into being in 1969, winners of 52 games. And I spent some time doing a little research, so I hope you like this. But I'm going to plant some guys up here because here's what I love about this show and why I forever praise Howard for giving me the opportunity to do the show, is that here's a guy, Dick Selma. Now, what I love about the baseball card, I do believe that's an old New York Met. But of course, he was selected by the San Diego Padres. So what does Topps do? they paint out New York on his hat, and then they color it in dark, and then they don't even bother coloring the blue stirrups or the blue shirt underneath, and they say Dick Selma Padres. Well, here's and there's Chris Cannizzaro Padres. Now look, here's what I love. I know a little bit about the 71 set. They had that black frame. It was different. And I did collect quite a few of these. I did not have Chris Cannizzaro. Now, the reason I put these guys as battery mates is that Cannizzaro would be, and these are the first, he would be the first all-star to represent the Padres. Doesn't get into the game in 69, which still remains my favorite all-star game of all time. And I've told you why in the past. It's the very first baseball game I ever watched from pitch number 1 to the very end of the game. I fell in love with Johnny Bench, my favorite player of all time. He happened to hit 2 home runs. Wait, take that back. He hit 1, got robbed on a brilliant play by Carl Yastrzemski. Frank Howard is one of the last players to hit an all-star game home run in front of his hometown. In 1969, he hit a bomb to right center field for the Senators, representing them. And, of course, Hank Aaron would do it in 72. One of his, I think, 2 home runs he ever hit in the All-Star game. And he did it in front of the Atlanta crowd in one of the last years that he played for the Braves. Of course, in 1974, he would break the record of Ruth. And so this is really some great stuff. And here I am going off on a tangent. But Chris Cannizzaro represented the San Diego Padres. Now, let's just get back, before I get to the Padre All-Star, let's go back to Dick Selma because he's pretty interesting. He's a guy that I guess you would say today is a serviceable pitcher. He went 12-10 that year with 1969. Now, notice I didn't say with the Padres because he went 2-2 with the Padres. In fact, he is the first winning pitcher on the very first game of the year. He beat Don Wilson. And I'm telling you something right now. Wilson, had he stayed a few more years in baseball, unfortunately, a tragedy occurred in his life, lost his life. I think in 1975, winter of 75. But Wilson and Durker were the anchors of really a legitimate Astro pitching staff. And I'll get into that a little bit later on. But Durker and Wilson would both be double-digit winners, both kind of scary. I would say this, that if you were looking at Wilson, he was the precursor to J.R. Richard in Houston. And he had the abilities, I think, of being probably very close, but not Bob Gibson. But still, being very close, but not Bob Gibson, means maybe you're not winning 251 games. But maybe over a 10-year career or a 12-year career, you're averaging 15, 16 wins a year. And he had a good fastball, did strike out a lot, yes. You could actually say maybe he was helped by the Astrodome. Yet again, Gibson was helped by the dimensions in Busch Stadium, as was Seaver, helped by Shea Stadium. But they still had to pitch outside those realms, and they were great pitchers. And Wilson was on the cusp of being a great pitcher. Durker was a 20-game winner. And I think what happened to the Houston teams of those early 70s, they obviously traded away really two cornerstones of a team that, had they kept them, put it this way, had the Astros not played in the Houston Astrodome, they might have been able to challenge the Dodgers and the Reds during those 70s. That Astrodome really, really hurt the offense more than it helped the defense and the pitching. I could probably make a great argument for that. All right. And they had two components on those Astro teams, Joe Morgan and Jimmy Wynn, that did not resonate. Their talents did not resonate in the Astrodome. And in fact, probably hurt Morgan more than it does Jimmy Wynn, even though Wynn was a power hitter. You take Wynn out of the Astrodome, look at what he did. He probably should have been the MVP of the Dodgers in '74. Look what Morgan does once he's traded to a team that knew how to win, just had to get over the hump. The Cincinnati Reds captures 2 MVPs, is multiple All-Star game appearances. Should have won the Rookie of the Year, by the way, in '65. I'm digressing again. And, of course, helps to be the catalyst of the big red machine. So here is Chris Cannizzaro, and here is Dick Selma. Ed Spezio, and I've talked about him before, hit the first home run. Actually, I didn't realize this. It's actually the first hit in Padre history, and it happens to be a home run off Don Wilson. And, of course, Cito Gaston, who had a marvelous 1970 season. He would be their all-star in 1970 and actually get a couple of at-bats, the first Padre to get at-bats in an all-star game. Of course, Gaston, he was 0 for 2, but he was in the lineup and was on the field when Pete Rose dashed home with the game-winning score. Of course, running into Ray Fosse, colliding with Ray Fosse, however you want to put it. But that was Cito Gaston's first appearance. Had a great season in 1970, but really his career was further down the line, winning back-to-back World Series with the Toronto Blue Jays. And I always felt good for him on that because he never was able to repeat his 1970 season of 23 home runs with the Padres. And shortly thereafter, I think within 3-4 years, was not playing baseball anymore. And but kudos. Hey, listen, still had an all-star season. Not too many guys can say that, Cito Gaston. But anyway, here's Dick Selma. Ready for this? So I'm looking at Selma. He goes 12-10. He spends his time with both the Padres and then the Padres. He goes 2-2 with the Padres, wins the first game for the Padres in their history on opening day, 2-1 against Don Wilson, and peppered that with 12 strikeouts. Man, he was a strikeout demon for that. He gets traded to the Cubs. And ready for this? He amasses 12 wins on the season. Actually, he was traded to the Cubs. DeRocher wanted him. And he figured with Jenkins, Holtzman, and I've talked about Holtzman before. Jenkins, of course, is a Hall of Famer. And Bill Hands, who had a pretty good season in '70. And Selma at the back of the rotation, he really thought that he could win the division. And, of course, the National League pennant with that foursome of the '69 Cubs. It wasn't to be because, like the Cubs, Selma, and I'm not laughing at Selma, he actually was, at one point, he gets traded for Joe Niekro and Gary Ross. And he goes 11-4. Goes 11-4. Or actually, he wins. He's 2-2. He won his next 9. And is at a high of 11-4 on August the 3rd. After he beat the Padres again. For this, not the second. Not the first, not the second. He beat the Padres 3 times that year. So he gets the first win in Padre history. And then he beats the Padres 3 times. So the Padres are involved in 4 of his winning decisions. And not only that, But in the games that he did, he was on the mound when the Cubs scored 19 runs. Biggest win of the year by the Cubs. I think it might be one of the largest shutout wins in the history of Major League Baseball. 19-0. Everybody was cracking home runs in the Cubs lineup. I think Banks had one, Williams had one, etc. But overall, ready for this? He had compiled a 3-0. He was 3-0 against the Padres, had a 1.04 ERA, pitched 8, 9, and 9 innings, and surrendered only 3 runs and registered 29 strikeouts against the Padre lineup of hitters. And he was just marvelous. He in that 19-0 win, he goes to 4-3 on the day that man landed on the moon. He was 11-4. He finished 12-10. He lost 6 of his last 7 starts. And remember, all you Met fans, remember how the Cubs had like a 9.5 game lead in August. The Cubs went into a tailspin. Well, one of the reasons that they go into a tailspin is that Selma can't pick up a win anymore. He was an ex-Met, and I just found that pretty ironic that he wins their first game and then beats the Padres 3 times, and then finishes the season 12-10, and just like the Cubs, just folds. Now, Chris Cannizzaro, I was doing this. Actually, Cannizzaro had probably what you consider 2 pretty good years for a catcher of, let's say, little to no offense, and a catcher who was probably seen more for his defense, but he certainly wasn't a Randy Hundley, certainly wasn't a Johnny Bench at the time. He was more like, and actually, he wasn't bad, but he wasn't great. And the Mets, of course, had first shot at him. He played for the Mets in '62, so he played for the Padres. I think there was a little trivia on that too, but I don't want to go overboard on it. I think Cannizzaro might have been the first catcher to catch for 2 different franchise expansion teams, the Mets and the Padres. But the reason I love this uniform, I love the fact that he is in that San Diego uniform. Obviously, I think that might be in spring training. And you can see it's the California brown with the gold. It's just a nice, simple uniform. It's home whites, so it says San Diego across it. I just like them because San Diego, let's face it, they had some ugly uniforms that I'm about to show you. But I think that's just simple and looks really good. Even the others, Ed Spezio's and Gaston's kind of mimics the Padre one. Now, this is probably their 70 uniform, even though that's a 71 card. But Cannizzaro, the thing with him, he's selected to the '69 All-Star game and never appears. But that year, he had a total of, I think, 12 home runs in his career. And he had 5 of them. He had 10 of them with the San Diego Padres. Just want to get something here. I apologize for this as I'm running out of time on this. But ready for this, he had home runs. He had 2 home runs in his career off Cincinnati's Jim Merritt. He hit Bill Hands, Steve Renko, and Ron Reed. Then he hit a home run the following year, 1970, off Dan McGinn. Now you say to yourself, well, what's so special about Dan McGinn? Well, if you had seen an earlier episode, you know this. He had the first home run in Montreal Expo history, Dan McGinn, against the Mets, no less. Then he hit one off Denny LeMaster. Then he goes crazy off Hall of Fame pitchers. He hit one off Juan Marichal. Then he hit one off Fergie Jenkins. Comes back and torches Jim Merritt. Hits one off Pat Jarvis in the year that he is traded to the Chicago Cubs. Pat Jarvis, ironically, is the one who served up on May 12th, 1970, Ernie Banks' 500th home run. Then his last 2 home runs come, ironically, against Tom Seaver and Steve Carlton. And his career for hitting home runs is done. So of his 18 home runs, 4 of them came against Hall of Fame pitchers. That's not too bad. 22% of your home runs are against Hall of Fame pitchers. So for whatever, this is why he lasted 8-9 seasons. Only with the Padres, I do believe, did he catch more than 120 games. I think in 1969 he caught 134 games, and then really never caught anything above that. Was always used as a utility kind of catcher. Now, first guy to ever start a game, and I was kind of surprised about this, but now thinking about it, I was not. And that's Randy Jones. He actually started the 76 game in Philadelphia in our bicentennial year. Can you believe that's going to be, it's 248 years our country has been together. And I can't believe 1976 we were celebrating. Man, it just seems like yesterday. And of course, it was played in Philadelphia and National League won the game. And what stands out in that game mostly is the number of Reds that appeared in that game and actually started. Because in 76, they had, I believe it was Perez, Rose, Concepcion, Bench, Griffey, and Foster, I think, started in the opening lineup for the Reds. And then you had Schmidt playing third base. All right? So here's the deal. Dave Winfield is the first guy to get a couple of hits in the All-Star game. And he did it in 1977 in Yankee Stadium, which would be his place in a couple of years. He actually had a double and a single off, I think, future teammates, Dave LaRoche and now that I think about it, he comes up in 81, and I think Sparky is gone. But Sparky is in 77. He's going to win the Cy Young. And LaRoche, who was not pitching for the Yankees, I think he was with the Angels at the time, but would be a future Yankee as well. He had 2 hits and an RBI in that series, in that All-Star game. And, of course, that was played at Yankee Stadium. How wild that 4 years later he would be manning left field for the Yankees. And, of course, then the first home run in the history of the Padres in the All-Star game was by Ken Caminetti, who was a MVP in 1996 for the Padres. Now, I want to talk a little bit about their other players here. And here's Ken Caminetti. Played also for the Astros. And now I want to focus on Preston Gomez, who I think, I was looking at his stats, his managerial stats. And I just want to say this about Gomez. I don't think he would be regarded as that bad of a manager. Now, I know he only won 52 games his first year. They played to a .321 winning percentage. They weren't a very good team. Assembling the team, though, was not his fault. They seemed to get a lot of over the hill. How can I say this? The Padres didn't go for young blood. Seemed like they were going for guys who had maybe 3-4 years in the major leagues. So they were towards the getting above or maybe towards the age 27, like Bill James says, that's usually your best season. But these were not going to be guys they could really, really, really build around. And it seemed like, you could probably have gotten a Nate Colbert from the Astros, put him at first base, and maybe build a team around him. But you needed younger players nonetheless. And it seemed like the Padres seemed to be going for, how do I say this without, listen, they're major leaguers. They seem to be going for like the mediocre, middle of the pack players on all the other teams. Nothing against Chris Cannizzaro, but that seemed to be the type of player that they were getting. Or an Ollie Brown, who was like a 5th outfielder for the Giants. Even though he had talent, he couldn't break into that outfield of Bonds and Mays. And then let's say Jim Ray Hart or Ken Henderson or whatever. So they thought maybe he had some had some potential, put him in. They probably would have been better off going younger and grabbing kids out of their minor leagues. Nevertheless, they win 52 games. He does improve them. They win 63 the following year. And then in 1971, the year he gets fired, they win 61. So without a doubt, Preston Gomez showed improvement on the team. It's not like he started out 63 wins and then the year he gets fired, it's 52. So I think he had the team in maybe the right direction. Then he goes 4-7 in 1972 and is abruptly fired after 11 games. He goes to the Astros in 74. And like I said, that Astro team in 74 is not really that good. But like I said, they do have, ready for this, they do have they have Milt May playing catcher, age 23, kind of a cast off from the 71 Pirates. They did have Lee May, but of course he's 31 years old. And he was involved in the big Joe Morgan trade. Does hit 24 home runs. It's more of a testimony to May's just unbelievable, Lee May's unbelievable raw strength and power that he was able to hit 24 in 1974. And in his first year in the Astrodome, he hit 29. It's a huge accomplishment. Then they had Tommy Helms, Roger Metzger, Doug Rader, who is known more for his glove than his hitting. That being said, he had 17 home runs and 78 RBIs for the Astros. Like I said, and they had Bob Watson playing left field. He was more of a first baseman. They would move May out of first base, trade him to the Orioles. And then they had Cesar Cedeno, who could have been maybe the next Roberto Clemente. Had a good career, could have been better. And he's another guy that was punished by the Astrodome. And a solid pinch hitter in Greg Gross, and he would come on and help. But here's the deal. They have Cliff Johnson, Johnny Edwards. They have Ollie Brown. Their bench guys are age 26, age 36, age 26, age 30. Mick Kelleher, shortstop, 26. Ray Busey, 25. Again, maybe they're a little bit too old. Nonetheless, they won 81 games. Finished off the pace. Their pitching staff, which was really good. They had Larry Durker, but he was 11-10, 2.90 ERA. Tom Griffin was 14-10. He had the most wins. He had a 3.54 ERA. Don Wilson was under 500, 11-13, 3.08 ERA. Dave Roberts, who was traded from the Padres to the Astros. In fact, ready for this? It was Dave Roberts and Tom Seaver who squared off in the very first game I ever saw at Shea Stadium, August 23rd, 1974. And Roberts had a 2.10 ERA for the Padres, I think, in 1971, and managed to win like 14 games in back-to-back years. So he definitely had some talent. And they had a really good pitcher, even though he was 34, and Claude Osteen. We've talked about him in the past on this show as well. They were 9-9. They had Ken Forsch in the bullpen. And, of course, Forsch would later go on and be a pretty good starter for both the Cardinals and the Astros. And so when given some talent, hey, Gomez proves he could manage it. And as I said, whether you like it or not, all right, they win 52 games, but by the time he's fired, they're at a higher winning percentage, right? 63, then 61, and technically 4-7, not bad. All right, and then he's let go. But look what he does in his first year with a decent amount of talent. He goes 81-81 in that 74 season. You got to remember, they have the Dodgers winning the pennant and the Reds just falling a couple of games shy, both winning 90-plus games, and then the Astros with 81 games. So Preston Gomez, probably, he is fired eventually in 75. Maybe could have been a pretty good manager in a different situation with a different team. Now, I have to, in my last couple of minutes here, talk about my favorite player, and that's Nate Colbert. Now, interesting thing, Colbert is the first guy who really does something for the Padres in an All-Star game. In 1972, he is the Padre All-Star in 71, 72, and I believe 73. And he doesn't start any of the games, but man, he went down to Atlanta and becomes part of All-Star history when he scores the winning run in extra innings off a hit by Joe Morgan. And he scores the winning run to help the National League beat the American League for and getting back off the snide of the 71 loss. And it would start another winning streak, 72, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 80, 1, 2, and then they would lose 83. So you're talking about 12 straight years. And Nate Colbert was part of that. The interesting thing is, now this is an ugly uniform. If it was just gold on the top and white on the bottom, not bad. I think too much of that gold is a little bit too much for me to handle. Nevertheless, I do like it because it is different. What's interesting about the Colbert thing is that All-Star game was played July 25th, very late in the year. A week later, San Diego is playing in Atlanta, and they have a doubleheader. And of course, he has the greatest day in Padre history and in Nate Colbert history when the Padres sweep the Braves in a doubleheader, and Colbert mashes 5 home runs, drives in 13 RBIs, has a ton of total bases. And the interesting thing is he tied, I believe, Stan Musial. Somehow he's connected to Stan Musial. I'm pretty sure has the most home runs in a doubleheader, something like that. And he tied Stan Musial for the record. Interestingly enough, reading about it later on, and listen, my memory of this is slipping because I read this article a couple of years ago. I just got the raw elements out of it. Apparently, Colbert was a St. Louis resident. Cardinals were his favorite team. He actually went to one of his first games, if not his first game, was the day that Musial went crazy and had his 5 home runs in a doubleheader. So this is the beauty of baseball. You just can't believe how baseball always seems to circle back. But Nate Colbert, to me, when you think of Padres, I know a lot of guys will think of Tony Gwynn, and obviously he is the face of the franchise. Before him, it was Dave Winfield. I like to think of Nate Colbert, who mashed 38 home runs in 1970, had some good years with the Padres in their infancy. And he's the type of guy, again, I equate guys like this. He might have been a guy. Oh, who I was thinking of? A Cliff Johnson. Cliff Johnson was in that 74 team. I can't believe how old he was. But Johnson, here's a guy who was really a good player. You take him out of the Astrodome, and man, he was a clutch player for the Yankees during their title runs in the late 70s. He was really a good player, good masher. A good home run hitting guy, could catch, was really not a catcher, but was really built for DH. And he had some productive years for the Yankees. And you say to yourself, wow, he was 26 in 1974. So he came up late in his career. And you say the same thing about a guy like Colbert. This is what I mean about the Padres and the Astros, kind of having older guys on their bench instead of going younger, and maybe using those guys in trades to get younger. And I look at a guy like Colbert, and it's a shame that he didn't get a chance to play maybe for a pennant contending team. Like, I'm even thinking like this. Probably today, maybe the Mets of 73 might have taken a chance on Colbert. Right? They don't do things like that. Maybe in the advent of both leagues going in the DH, now Colbert might have been more of an allure for teams to say, listen, let's just give him 100 at-bats and let's see. If he gives us 15 home runs, man, what do we have to lose? So that is the San Diego Padres of 1969. Hope you enjoyed the show. Of course, my Mount Rushmore of Padres begins with Nate Colbert, the great first baseman and the first guy to score a winning run for the Padre organization in the All-Star game. This is Will O'Toole. Again, shout out to Howard for all his help on this. Hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll see you next week with another edition. Bye now.